Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's May 17th, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host today. If you have some questions or comments for Helga, you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them in the chat section on the YouTube website. Now, Helga, I think we should begin with these dramatic developments from the last week regarding the situation of NATO's war in Ukraine. You have on the one side Zelenskyy's victory tour through the capitals of Europe, where he was collecting pledges of weapons and money and being treated as a hero. At the same time, he was reiterating his refusal to negotiate, and even to the extent of insulting the Pope by rejecting any prospect for a negotiated settlement. But then you also had a very heavy Russian missile attack into Ukraine, hitting military sites and ammunition warehouses. Then you also have this report from Seymour Hersh that there's some pressure now on the West from some of the Eastern European governments that are flooded with Ukrainian immigrants that are suggesting that now is the time to negotiate. And then finally, on that same topic, something we've been fighting for is a more vocal response to the US policy coming from Americans. There was an open letter in the New York Times yesterday from real military experts calling for diplomacy as opposed to more war. So what is your assessment of where things stand at the moment and the fight going on in Ukraine?
Well, I think the Zelenskyy tour through different European nations has made very clear who is in the war camp and who is generally trying to find an end to this conflict. You have on the one side more promises of more weapons, more, the British, want to train Ukrainians on F-16s. The French are planning to send all kinds of equipments. Germany going out of its way. And, it is very clear that this does not do the Ukrainian people any good, because it is now becoming more and more clear that the leaks which have been coming from the Pentagon a couple of weeks ago, basically saying that the Ukrainian so-called spring offensive, that the Ukrainian army is in no position to do this, at least not, unless some more atrocities, more horrible weapons could be used. So in a certain sense, the situation comes to a point where a negotiation is absolutely crucial. And it is very clear that many forces around the world are really getting very, very desperate and agitated that such a negotiation must take place. You mentioned the advertisement in the New York Times. I mean, this is basically people warning, in the sharpest possible terms that this war could go out of control. And, this is such people as Jack Matlock, who, is a senior diplomat from the United States who has been a witness of all of the events around the collapse of the Soviet Union, the German unification. So he knows what the Western, betrayal has been. Then you have basically a whole group of African nations who have now offered that they should come together and mediate, among them South Africa, Egypt, and several others. And initial reports are that both Putin and Zelenskyy have agreed to meet with them. Then naturally you still have the ongoing efforts by President Lula. The offer of Erdogan is still on the table. Depending how the second round of the election goes, that may be still an option. Also, the Pope, as you said, he again reiterated the absolute need to negotiate, and Zelenskyy flatly refused it. But, you have right now a clear understanding that, this cannot go on forever. And given the fact that the Ukrainian military and people are really being ground up and at the end of their strengths, it is completely unhuman to continue this war in any form, and that there must be a negotiated solution. So, we basically are trying to address that in a way which is very, trying to get to a level above parties, above conflict. And that is the occasion of the upcoming 60th anniversary of the famous speech by John F. Kennedy, which he gave in the American University, which was one of the most powerful speeches for peace. And, we have an international leaflet which will circulate. We are asking all of you to sign it because we want to basically build for this event. We will have an event in Washington where we're also asking the broadest possible participation, disregarding party, disregarding, any kind of other political conviction, but unite around the idea of bringing America back to the paradigm which was clearly expressed by President Kennedy. And a little later, I want to actually read you some quotes because not everybody of our listeners may be familiar with that speech. But I think what we need right now is really a drumbeat for peace, because if this is continuing, it is the logic of war that ever more horrible weapons will be used. And, it's also very clear that the role of the British government has been one of the side of the warmongers. They started, and that has now come out all publicly, they started to train Ukrainian military already in 2015. That was when the Minsk process was underway, supposedly, or that's what the world was led to believe. And, they always were the spearhead. They were the first ones to deliver tanks. They are the first ones now to train Ukrainians, or they will start to do so on the F-16 even if they don't use it. So it is very clear that we need an overwhelming mobilization of the world to say enough is enough. We have to think about ending this war through a negotiation. We have to start rebuilding Ukraine. And basically much of the rest of the world, which is in a terrible condition. So I think that is my initial response. So it's not decided. Everything depends on you, on us, on our mobilization. And that's why I want to invite you to be part of it.
Well, there are several people who ask questions specifically about that, what can be done. And I think this idea of getting the leaflet from our website and circulating it is extremely important. But I want to begin with a question from Preston, who's despondent about the British role. He basically says that it's clear that the British are pushing to extend the war. And he said there's no mention of peace negotiations on Zelensky's tour. And he said, if Zelenskyy is reckless and bombs Russian territory, as some of these Pentagon leaks indicate that he's thinking about, will Russia be forced to expand the war into Western Ukraine and possibly into other NATO countries?
Well, I think that that is what the war faction clearly wants. We had the statement of the RUSI, the Royal International Service Institute, or whatever it's called. It's one of the, if not the oldest think tank of Great Britain. They had called more than a year ago that there should be a Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids by getting Ukraine to try to retake Crimea, and then that leading to a super Cuban crisis. And supposedly that would be the moment to negotiate, which is naturally, a risking World War III. And, obviously, if you have strikes into Russia, it will cause a response. I mean, we have still the unanswered drone attack on the Kremlin of a couple of weeks ago, where the Russians have said that they would make an appropriate response, not revealing what that would be. But, then you have all these partisans, so-called, trying to do sabotage actions inside Russia. And, obviously this is, obviously the patience of Putin has been remarkable, because, many red lines have been crossed. but there will be a red line where, it is the red line, which then means total catastrophe. So I think that is the danger, and I think that that is what these people are playing with, and they should be denounced. And the absolutely one-sided demonization of Russia, that is really part of the war game. And I think, again, people should take a lesson from Kennedy, who, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, was able to find a quite different tone.
And I have a couple of questions that will come up around Kennedy in just a moment, but speaking of this reaction from some of the Eastern European countries looking for a way out of the war, we have a question from someone at Tallinn University in Estonia, Ludmila Zaichenko. She said, I'd like to know, in your expert opinion, how many years this war may go. Do you have a prediction or a forecast on that?
Well, it is very clear that the war machine, the military-industrial complex in many countries would like the war to go on forever. I mean, we know that the Pentagon has made some orders of weapon systems which go, into years from now, which shows you very clearly the intention. But I don't think that is a realistic view, first of all, because the Ukrainian people will not be able to carry on. I mean, the Ukrainian economy is almost destroyed already. The number of people who can be pulled into the fighting force is limited. And even if you replenish that with mercenaries from different countries, I mean, there is a limit to where this, meat grinder, how long that can go. And there is another aspect, and that is that it has been very clear that the West is not in such great shape. The sanctions against Russia did not function. The Russian economy, has some disadvantages, but overall they're doing quite well because they have reoriented towards Asia and the south of Asia, east of Asia. But the West is doing terribly. The West was not able to replenish the ammunition. That is the result. If you do deindustrialization for several decades and you focus on the green paradigm, well, then you destroy your own physical economy. And then when you are confronted with such a situation, you are standing there pretty much empty-handed, not entirely, but going in this direction. Then one should also not overlook the fact that, there is right now a tremendous strategic realignment going on, which is not yet clear how that will, basically play out. Jim Rogers, one of the major American investors, just now basically said that the role of the dollar as an international reserve currency is finished. First of all, he says no currency ever remained in such a position forever, only for, I think the longest he said was 150 years. And he says the fact that the international reserve currency must be neutral for everybody to use it, since the United States itself violated that principle by weaponizing the dollar, by using it to punish countries for, sanctions and other reasons, squeezing assets or taking assets from Russia, from Afghanistan, from other countries in Latin America. So basically, many countries, especially of the global south, looked at that and they said, look, it's too risky to keep trading in dollars. So they went into trade with their local currencies. So you have now a lot of trade going on with rupees and renminbi and rubles and other currencies. So that has an uncertainty, because when is the point when that will impact the stability of the financial system in such a way that you could have a supernova, an evaporation of the entire system. Obviously, this is an extremely delicate question. It's a question which has security implications. But, that is why it's very difficult to predict what, even if some forces have the intention to keep that war for years, keep a war forever, that does not mean that they will be able to do it. Now, obviously, the longer this war goes, the higher the risk becomes, the bigger the danger is that it will go out of control, the bigger is the suffering of the Ukrainian people. And therefore, I think it is really in the benefit of everybody to start negotiations without precondition. This is what Pope Francis had actually offered. And now it seems that, even some of the neighbor countries, Poland and the Baltic countries, are pressuring Zelenskyy to go in the direction of negotiation. Now, that is an unconfirmed press report. I was not able to 100% verify if that's the case. It's not impossible. I know that Hungary is very much in favor of ending the war. And so you have the club, the Peace Club of Lula. That's Brazil and many countries of the global south. Now you have the Xi Jinping initiative, the 12 Principle plan. You have the Pope Francis offer. You have a group of African nations offering to mediate. You have the Erdogan plan. So, I think that it is becoming very, very clear that the overwhelming and many, many appeals, many individuals, many people who are absolutely not wanting to take one side or the other and say justice has to stop. I think it's becoming a steamroller, and I think we have to accelerate that until the point that this danger, which is the danger of the annihilation of mankind, is really overcome.
You've mentioned a number of things, and we have a whole bunch of questions on the war. So I'll give you a few questions one at a time that you can probably answer fairly quickly. But we have from Zambia a question. Someone asks about the African heads of state going to Ukraine and Russia. Will the West accept that, given their usual tendency to undermine anything coming from Africa?
Well, they will try to ignore it. We have seen the arrogance of many of the leaders of the so-called West. Famous Joseph Borrell with his jungle outside of the beautiful garden of the European Union, which has become the laughingstock of the whole world. But, one also cannot deny the fact that the global south is the overwhelming majority of the human species. I mean, the G7 is, already overtaken by the BRICS. They have a larger GDP than the G7. But now you have the massive expansion of the BRICS. 19 countries have applied to be part of it. And you have other organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is also becoming very, very powerful and big. So I think, you have right now a massive shift. And, the obvious solution would be that countries like Germany, France, Italy, others in Europe would say, we work with the global south. We see that the period of colonialism was an absolute mistake, and we want to make good for that. Now, we are, from the Schiller Institute, campaigning for that very much because, I think that if the world would be separated in two completely different blocks, where you would have NATO, the US, Great Britain, the EU, Japan, and maybe Australia on the one side, and then you would have China, Russia, the global south, the BRICS, Africa, Latin America on the other side, and these two blocks would be completely separated. I fully agree with Dr. Mahathir from Malaysia, who warned that if it would come to such a total separation, it would mean World War III. And I think that is really true. If the world falls into two hostile blocks, or at least one block being hostile to the other, I think that's the absolute prescription for a catastrophe. And therefore, we are, hoping that there will be some European countries at least who, say, no, for us to break with China is suicide. We have broken with Russia already. Now we have to absolutely build the relationship with China, with India, with Russia, with, Brazil, with other countries from the global south, and actually all of them. And hopefully that will catalyze something inside the United States, where the United States would also find back to a period where they did not have this idea that an unipolar world must be defended by all means, but that, that there must be a cooperation. And the more courageous the Europeans would show the way, the higher the chance, in my view, is that the United States will basically get out of its present orientation.
Now, Helga, we have a question from someone who identifies herself as a fan of yours, who asks about, speaking of arrogance toward Africa, the foot in the mouth of Annalena Baerbock when she came out attacking the South Africans based on this report from the United States, which turned out to be a false report, admittedly so by the US, that South Africa was providing weapons to Russia. Do you have any comments on this latest faux pas by the German foreign minister?
Well, I think the American, I think it was it Jake Sullivan or maybe anyway, whoever was the American, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, he apologized. He said that he was mistaken. I don't think Baerbock has found the honesty to do likewise. I mean, she runs around with her value-based foreign policy, and I have the impression, when adult leaders listen to her, they let her talk, but then they go about their ways and they couldn't care less about what she says. I had that impression when she was in China. She was now in Saudi Arabia, and she didn't even have a press conference with the Saudi foreign minister afterwards, so that is an indication that they did not agree. And I think this woman is really the worst foreign minister we ever had in Germany, and one can only hope that this government goes out of office fairly soon, that we have a new election and we get a real diplomat in this position.
Okay, now you're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, the founder of the Schiller Institute, and someone who has taken the lead internationally in the fight for a move toward a new security architecture and a new economic development architecture. Now, I have an anonymous email from someone from Britain who is referring to your discussion about the economic problems in the West and writes about the Daily Telegraph report that the British, in order to get the HMS Queen Elizabeth II aircraft carrier in operation, they had to cannibalize from their other major aircraft carrier for parts and equipment. He asks, does anyone in the UK establishment recognize how difficult it is to conduct a war when you've deindustrialized and when nearly half of your population is having trouble meeting daily needs?
Well, maybe not, otherwise they wouldn't do what they are doing. But it is a fact that, Great Britain is being shaken for months now, almost daily, by some strike or another, and many people can't make ends meet. That does not prevent the upper class to do what they do. I'm sorry. My imitation is probably not very good, but I have a hard time in keeping a straight face when I look at this nobility in Great Britain as it was portrayed in the recent medieval spectacle, which was the royal wedding. I mean, this country is out of step. And, to build aircraft carriers at this point is really also not so smart, given the fact that the Russians have developed hypersonic missiles. I think also submarines, which can, basically, the aircraft carriers can be wiped out instantly. It is a technology which is outdated, which has been surpassed by superior weapons and technologies. And therefore, it just shows you that if you try to fight the battle of the last war, it is not exactly a winning perspective.
Now, we do have a couple of questions about the Vatican intervention. Someone wrote, can the Pope speak to Chancellor Scholz? Would you think that would have an impact? And then there's another question from Joe from New York. How can the Vatican have credibility with Russia when it remained silent when the Zelenskyy regime was banning the Russian Orthodox churches and arresting priests?
Well, on the first question, I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of discussion in Germany right now is why is Chancellor Scholz doing what he's doing? Because, before this special military operation, as the Russians call it, broke out on the 24th of February 22, he was very clear that, the heavy weapons, that was after the war started. But, he was very clear that Germany under no circumstances should get involved in this conflict. And shortly afterwards, he said, heavy weapons would lead to World War III. And now he's doing whatever his, masters, but, somebody is telling him what to do because it's not in the interest of the German people. So the big 64 million euro question is, why is he doing that? I can't answer that. I could speculate, but I don't want to do that. But it is an unanswered question. And, in the same way, like he was standing by Biden when Biden had announced in February 22 that the Nord Stream would never go into effect and that the US had a way of making sure of that. He didn't say a mumbling word and just say we do everything together. So, he is definitely, he will have to answer some questions. Does he obey his oath that he will, protect the German people and prevent them from harm? I don't think that question will be answered in a very good fashion for him. Now, on the question of the Orthodox Church, I think that is, if one would make a list and, on what the rules-based order is doing, they're breaking the law right and left, and democracy and human rights and all of these things, they have become so farcical that, I think the whole world looks through it. And therefore, I think that maybe one should just make a list of all the things where words and deeds are not fitting together. So I think that should be probably done by several people.
I think we've started it with the Executive Intelligence Review, but I think we should pursue that. Now, I maybe this will be the final question, because it brings us back to the John F. Kennedy question that you wanted to talk more about. It's from William in New York, who asks, what effect do you think Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s comments that the CIA killed his uncle, John Kennedy, and covered it up will have on world opinion and on U.S. policy? And is there enough memory in the American people of what John F. Kennedy represented with the shift after the Cuban Missile Crisis for this to be an effective polemic?
Well, I think it will be because, first of all, it's the first time, to my knowledge, that a member of the Kennedy family raised it in this way. This has been mentioned by other people, writers, commentators, but it is the nephew of John F. Kennedy and the son of Robert Kennedy who reports that. I think this is very, very significant. And, I can only imagine that there are some patriotic Americans who will follow it up. But, we basically plan to do something in addition to that. And that is, we have said since a long time, and my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, was very emphatic on that he said the problem with the United States started with the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the cover-up by the Warren Commission. That murder and the fact that the institutions were not able to discover who did that, but lied, obviously, on, the whole affair, means, that there is a wound in the history of the American people. And the paradigm which now has emerged is 100% the opposite of what Kennedy stood for. And the past 50 years since the murder, or 60 years, they represent, a complete different paradigm. And look, right now the United States is feared by most people in the world. People don't want to be anti-American, but they have no choice, because if you have a country which has, basically interventionist wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and other countries around the world with a lot of damage. If I would make a list of how many people died, the Iraq war was based on lies. That's now a fact. Has there been a tribunal in Den Haag? I don't remember. I've heard about that. So, I could make a long list. The Hirsch accusation that it was the US who did the sabotage in Nord Stream remains to be answered. And there are many other things. So the problem is, if we don't get a world order where the world can work with the United States, I'm afraid it will lead to World War III. So the big question is, how do you get the United States to be the America it once was, with the American Revolution, with the founding fathers, with John Quincy Adams, with Lincoln, with Roosevelt, and naturally, emphatically, with Kennedy. So that is why, we have now a mobilization, and I actually want to invite you, because we will try to make this event on June 10th in Washington an absolute watershed, where we will try to get as many people into a broad coalition to all unite around the spirit of Kennedy as it was expressed in his American speech. So we have a leaflet which you can find on the website of the Schiller Institute and other of our websites, the LaRouche Pub, the TLO website. So download this leaflet, sign it, get all your friends to sign it, use it in the social media to circulate it, because we want as many people internationally to join and appeal to the president or the next president of the United States to go back to the tradition of John F. Kennedy. And I want to read you now a short excerpt of the or a quote from that larger speech. The link to the entire speech will be under this program. So after this show is over, you should please read the entire speech. But let me give you the following quote from John F. Kennedy. What kind of peace do I mean? And this was to say, shortly, less than a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where he said that. What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. And then a little bit later in the speech he says, so let us not blind to our, not let us be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interest and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And we are all mortal. Now, that unfortunately was proven shortly thereafter when Kennedy was assassinated. But, it is that spirit which you find in many other Kennedy speeches, because Kennedy represented a completely different America. At his first 50th anniversary of his death, we had a beautiful performance of the Requiem by Mozart in the Boston Cathedral. We did that because after he was killed, Jackie Kennedy had organized that the Requiem was performed for him. And we did that with our Schiller chorus and orchestra in a very beautiful performance, which you still can find on the internet. So you should listen to it. And we we put in the middle of in the pause, some of the most powerful quotes from John F. Kennedy on the limitless perfection of man, the absolute need to overcome poverty of the global south, and an absolute optimism, that man, when he is guided by goodwill, can solve all problems. I mean, that kind of a spirit used to be typically American. And, it is that America which we all have to fight around the world to get back, because the world needs a good America. And John F. Kennedy, in one way is the continuation of what FDR did. And, he is the last president who expressed that spirit. And we want to make sure that we impact the American society in such a way with our campaign that we mobilize all good Americans to get together and make sure that the future of America is that of the American Revolution and the American Republic again. So join our campaign, sign the leaflet, call our offices, mobilize together with us to make this event on June 10th the absolute change in American history for the better.
Well, Helga, thank you for reminding us again of that American spirit of optimism. And with that, we should all get to work building for this June 10th conference, and we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.